Well, it's very good to see you, and I'm glad that the annual conference of the economists there is going well. I know how important this event is every year. But I'd like to thank you, Joan, for the opportunity to join you. It's also good to be at least virtually on the stage with Matteo, and I only wish I was there in person for the second course. But indeed, let me start off with a few opening thoughts, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. The first, and this is fundamental, and I assume it has already been is that the Eastern Mediterranean is today a major theater of great power competition. What we're seeing, I think, is the end of a very long and stable period during which the United States was the uncontested ordering power in that region. As long as that set of conditions held, and I think it's basically since the Mediterranean, and that was important because it meant that even the worst local crises, like the ones that we saw from time to time in the past between Greece and Turkey, those crises were kept within certain boundaries. They were local crises, and they had mainly local effects. And now I think that is what is changing. Russia is present with a very significant naval force. China is present in the region with port investments as well.
Wes, we're experiencing a few problems with the connection with
changes of what were otherwise local crises, and it makes them less localized. When you see that in the latest standoff between Greece and Turkey, the crisis has been about a lot more than just drilling rights, continental shelf. Crisis, I think, is looked at as a kind of indicator for whether Turkey is still part of the strategic, whether the European Union should develop strategic autonomy, whether Russia can be an arbiter of local outcomes, and so forth. The point, I think, is that the addition of big powers into the equation changes the stakes of the game. Second thought I'd like to offer, just to start our conversation, is about the objectives of China and Russia in the Mediterranean. What is it that they want? And I think we tend, probably with good reason, to focus on Russia's activity in Libya. But they are not the ultimate aim. They are means to the Russia's role in Syria or Libya gives it leverage over migration and energy flows, and thereby leverage over Europe. Gives it access to Europe. And so the point, I think, is that both China, for both of them, presence in the Mediterranean is not about Mediterranean itself, but it's about Europe. Europe is what is at stake in the competition. And the final thought is a clarifying moment for U.S. strategy in that the mold for U.S. foreign policy in the Eastern Mediterranean, as we've known it for many decades, was basically set in the Cold War. And that mold was America would keep outside powers out, but for the most part it would be a bystander in local economy. And that allowed the United States to sometimes weigh in at the last minute to diffuse tensions between Greece and Turkey. That's what President Johnson did in '64, that's what Kissinger could have done in '74, that's what Bill Clinton did in 1996. So maintaining an essentially reactive policy made a lot of sense for the U.S. because crises, local crises, would often work themselves out on their own. And even if they didn't, they were ultimately occurring in a kind of geopolitical vacuum because of the Cold War, because the U.S. was the only game in town. And it strikes me that in an era of great power competition, 11th hour, it creates an opening for Russia and China to insert themselves as arbiters, but also it gives Erdogan incentives to push the envelope.
This is proving
Russia, that gives Erdogan an opportunity to pursue a more escalatory approach in the knowledge that Turkey has geopolitical options. And so in those conditions, it strikes me that the best posture for the West, both for the United States and for Europe, is to begin to take a more proactive approach to regional diplomacy, heading off crises before they convert. And I think that you see that now in the U.S. as it shifts its policies and strategies in the region, towards 3+1 format, the partnership with Cyprus. All of that, to me, points to a role for the United States to be focused on factors of long-term stability so that we're not in constant reaction mode. So let me stop with those thoughts. I'm happy to hear any reactions or questions that you might have.
Well, thanks very much, Wes. We did have a little bit of a problem there with the connection, that there was some buffering and it wasn't possible to hear all of your remarks, but I think we managed to grasp the main ones, which is a point I know you've made before about how the US role is being contested in this region by Russia, by China, and that's making the situation a lot more complex. So let's see if we can have a better connection in a conversation. And my first question is to you is, Turkey's been sending mixed messages about its intentions in the Eastern Med, appearing to step back and then stepping up its hostile rhetoric. How hopeful are you that bilateral talks will take place and lead to a de-escalation of tensions?
Well, thoughts on that. I'll try to, if you have a hard time hearing me, just give me a thumbs down.
Okay.
I think the move by Turkey it takes the pressure, it creates space for diplomacy. But I would keep two things in mind to set expectations. One of them is that the deployment of the ORIC race in the first place, I think, was an effort to create leverage on Erdogan's part that previously did not exist. So a big part of Erdogan's diplomatic is his willingness to take risks that his interlocutors are unwilling to take. And I think that logic is intimately intertwined with Turkish diplomacy and crisis. Now that we've had a recent U.S. visit, the EU is considering sanctions. Both of those things suggest to me the ship was removed because it was no longer leverage, it was a liability. So it's possible that we're seeing the ship withdrawn for a period of time to avoid sanctions, but it may be that this is a momentary reprieve, which is to say, I don't think we've seen the last of aggressive Turkish moves in the standoff, because they are a means by which Turkey creates leverage.
Okay, thanks. So how does the US see its role in mediating between its close ally Greece and fellow NATO member Turkey?
Well, I would say that the visit from Secretary Pompeo was incredibly important. Not only the timing, but the substance of it, because I think it sent a message that the United States was strategically invested in the issue. I think it's part of a broader reinvestment of the United States in the Eastern Mediterranean over the last couple of years. The U.S. joining for the first time the 3+1 format, the military cooperation with Greece, increasing port visits, and then are you able to hear me?
We lost you. We lost you there for just a few sentences. So if you want to repeat the last couple of sentences.
Yeah, I think it's just it's incredibly important that the United States is reinvesting in the region, and you see that by this administration taking steps that would have been unthinkable even a few years ago. For the United States, I think historically to balance between Greece and Turkey has meant a kind of quiet diplomacy where the United States brings pressure to bear often at the last minute vis-a-vis Turkey. And I think it's one of the things that is starting to change. The U.S. diplomacy in the region will have to be more proactive, and it will have to bring pressure to bear earlier in the process in order to dissuade aggressive Turkish moves.
Okay, what about the longer term and some of the issues that Turkey has tried to put on the table, a long list? How do you see any of those being addressed or resolved over the longer term?
Well, I doubt there will be a solution in the sense of a final resolution. There are, as you say, different sets of issues, so continental boundaries, EEZs and airspace and Aegean island dispute. I think Turkey sees it as being in its interest to use leverage from aggressive move to prompt a kind of general discussion on all of these matters. I think it's probably in Greece's interest to keep those discussions focused on the key matter at hand. So I think the right recipe, the only solutions that work will be local solutions that are not arbitrated from the outside. The most likely outcome I see is one that creates some equation of equitable access to resources in return for the cessation of military aggression. That doesn't mean larger Western powers should be hands-off. I think their role should be to bring enough pressure to bear to de-escalate the situation and keep China and Russia from exploiting the situation for their own gain, and basically creating space for bilateral diplomacy. We have a lot of precedent. For example, Greece and Italy's agreement for maritime boundary lines. Lots of examples in this region of states amicably adjusting lines in a crowded space. The fact that Turkey is not a party to the law of the sea should not be decisive. With Israel, which is not a party to the law on the sea. The key is, I think the recent moves suggest that enough space exists to at least begin that process, but it may be a very long road.
Okay, thanks. Just a final question to you then. We had a panel this morning with some of the prime ministers from the region, Edi Rama from Albania and Zoran Zaev from North Macedonia. It's been a very eventful year in the region, putting the pandemic aside, many elections. We had the recent US brokered agreement with Serbia and Kosovo. Do you think the region is moving in the right direction, Western Balkans, or are you concerned about what China and Russia are up to in the region?
Yes. I think it's a real bright spot that a lot of people didn't expect. It says a lot about the moment of history that we're in, that the good news is coming from the Balkans. I think what we've seen is a significant increase in US diplomatic engagement in that region, and it's based on, I think, the principle that you start at the thin end of the wedge with the easiest problems and work your way up to harder problems. And also, it's based on the principle, I think, of local solutions. You see that in Prespa, in the Serbia-Kosovo breakthrough. I think the approach has been to create space for two parties to agree to what's in their interest. It's an improvement over the Holbrooke model, which was basically to call the shots from the outside, create deadlines. So again, I think, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, what has created the renewed focus for the United States is the fact of great power competition. The U.S. is showing up more often in the Balkans at a more senior level, and I think it makes a difference.